damn fine cup of coffee.
Welcome to Monsters After Midnight. Tonight, episode 1, Creatures That Go Bump in the Night. What are we going to be reading about? Well, let me tell you. Modern day werewolf sightings. Werewolves. Something stepping out of the movie screen and into our lives in the modern day. There's a famous case in Wisconsin we're going to go over. Followed by El Chupacabra, the case of Generation X's first terrifying cryptid. Then we're going to dive into mad gassers, goblin attacks, and we're going to top it off with the cherry of all the creatures that go bump in the night, Big Daddy Sasquatch, with an attack in Ape Canyon. So welcome again to the inaugural episode of Monsters After Midnight. Episode 1, Creatures That Go Bump in the Night. If you're unfamiliar with how I do things here, we're going to be reading. We're going to be reading a lot. We're going to be reading first-hand accounts of each of the creatures that were just listed. Modern day accounts. I'm talking 2000s. People encountering werewolves. They're out there. They're stalking you. They're looking for you. But that's where we're starting tonight. Werewolves. The book we're reading is a great one. This one right here. Real encounters, different dimensions, and other worldly beings. Why I love this book is because it has modern day sightings. Stuff in the 2000s. Typically, we're reading shit from the 50s and beyond, which does prove encounters with strange creatures have happened since time immemorial and all over the world. It's not just something that's in America, and it's not just something that's recent. That's why I love this book. Modern day sightings. So buckle up. We're about to dive in to a werewolf encounter that happened not so long ago. And I'd like everybody to please, if you would, are you gonna join us? Please welcome our kitty co-host for Monsters After Midnight. This is Mewtwo. Now she has a sister, the much more shy Mew. Might not ever make an appearance, but Mewtwo, she loves being the co-host. She loves learning about monsters. So she's going to learn about the werewolves of Wisconsin with us. Ain't that right? Werewolves, something that we consider completely fake, made up of fiction. When you look back in the history, I have a great book, The Encyclopedia of Witchcraft and Demonology, that talks about the origins of werewolves. During the witch trials, many were murdered under the accusation of being a loup-garou, a werewolf. Most of these accusations happened in France. Go figure. People living on the outskirts of town, maybe they're a little hairy, maybe they're blamed for livestock being murdered. They were considered werewolves and usually drowned or burnt at the stake. If you're to go with the academic who wrote this bad boy, Russell Hope Robbins, he'd tell you werewolves are fake, made up by the hysteria of the time. Not much to it. If you are to go by the eyewitness accounts we're about to read, werewolves are very much real and in our time, lurking in the backwoods around the world. The werewolves of Shawano County, Wisconsin. We are grateful to Paul Dale Roberts for the details of another intriguing call to his paranormal hotline. Greg Posada and Eugene Pointer of Shawano County, Wisconsin, called the paranormal hotline with their report of 2 werewolves seen near Grass Lake on January 9th, 2013. They claimed that these two creatures that appeared to be werewolves were definitely bipedal. One of the creatures had grayish hair, while the other had brownish hair. Both creatures had snouts. When the creatures were observed, they both seemed to be bent down drinking water from the lake. Eugene and Greg both claimed that the creatures sniffed the air and then turned to look at them. They let off a howl that sounded like that of a regular wolf, then ran off to the nearby thicket. The encounter occurred around 2 p.m., and Eugene and Greg were both shaken by this encounter. Greg says that the brown-coated creature was at least 7 feet tall, while the gray-coated creature was perhaps 6 feet tall. Eugene said that this was not the end of the story. After their encounter with the werewolves, no more than 10 minutes had passed when they spied a silver disc in the surrounding forest. Our theory, once again, strikes. Lights in the sky, creature running by. If you have an encounter with something floating in the sky, or perhaps a creature that's run by, dollars to donuts, the next thing that will happen is you will see either lights or you will see either the creature, depending on what you've seen. These events are always connected. So dollars to donuts every time when there's a light in the sky, there's a creature running by. I guess this applies to werewolves as well. The sighting of the disc lasted only about 3 minutes, but during the time of the sighting, everything felt surreal. Everything moved in slow motion. Eugene and Greg felt relaxed and at ease while they watched the disc in the sky. Eugene does not understand how they could have two paranormal encounters in one day. With what these two encountered, right? They see this wolf man run by, and then they see a light in the sky. It's been described as a few different things. Sometimes we read it as the... God, what's it called? Oh my goodness, I'm forgetting. Yeah, sometimes we read it as the Goblin universe. The Goblin universe is what it was originally known in cryptozoology, right? The Goblin universe was all the super strange events that no one could explain. Fast forward to more modern times, they call it now the Oz factor. So the Oz factor is having an encounter with a strange being, seeing like lights in the sky, and then there being a strange aura around it. That's what we're going to learn about right now. So the Oz factor, Roberts explains, is a term invented by author/researcher Jenny Randles in 1983 to describe the strange, seemingly altered state of consciousness experienced by some witnesses of unidentified flying objects. Randles has noted the strange calmness and lack of panic described by witnesses. And this is a common theme. If you've been with me during the Midnight or Sunrise Book Club when we've read American Cosmic or Encounters, that's something that's very common. People who have these strange encounters with beings of the beyond the pale or lights in the sky, they report being calm in the moment and staying there and watching it. While other witnesses at the scene, for whatever reason, are like, I gotta go, I gotta get out of here, and they just leave. While the person who's meant to see it stays and observes. It's a common trope. So this calmness relative to the bizarre circumstances that they experienced, and says that it defines the Oz factor, the sensation of being isolated or transported from the real world into a different environmental framework, where reality is but slightly different. The Oz factor is associated with the fairy tale, The Land of Oz, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, right? We know that. They click their heels together, you travel through a tornado, you get to this weird other dimension. What this story, the Oz factor, reminds me of, the strange calmness reminds me of, is reading through Encounters. There's a family we meet who owns a little doggy. A dog's very ill. It seems like it's on its deathbed. They call the vet. The vet's ready to put it down. The wife and the family begins to pray all night long, asking, protect my dog, heal my dog, staying up all night. The husband goes to bed. Early in the morning. We're talking about 2 a.m., 3 a.m. Cries are heard from the living room for the husband to come see what's happening. He awakes. Tired, he shuffles down. What does he see? He sees this mist over his dog. Seems to be like, whoom, 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 inspecting it. What does his wife see? She reports to see this little orb floating, a little metal orb floating over the dog that's shooting down a beam at it. Whoom, whoom. The husband sees this, turns around and goes to bed. He doesn't know why he does this. He still wonders why he does this. But in his mind, he was super calm, and this voice was repeating to him, just go upstairs and wait. And that's what he did. He waited awake. Meanwhile, his wife downstairs reports to just be watching this amazing thing happening, filled with feelings of love and joy as her dog is literally being healed in front of her. The man, completely calm, waits for about 45 minutes until the craft or mist above his dog leaves. Then he has a sensation to go back downstairs. He's like, oh, I can go back down now. He doesn't know why he was so calm. He doesn't know why he decided to go. In the middle of watching this amazing thing happen, he has no idea why he decided to go back to bed. But he does. Dude's a Marine. Dude's straight up. Dude has no psychological issues. There's no reason he'd be lying about this story. Same with the wife. They have a kid. They're solid parents. The wife's very religious. She sees this ball of energy happen, this little metal orb heal her dog. She's like, oh, those are just my angels. The dude goes on a whole spiritual journey trying to figure out what the fuck it is. All to say, this calmness, this stillness that comes over someone when they experience something paranormal is a common trope. We also see it in abductions. People feel abjectly terrified, but something deep in them is calm, and they know that these entities aren't going to hurt them. They trust them for whatever reason. Same thing's happening here. Last thing I'll say about the Oz factor, it reminds me a lot of the old story from the 18th century about the Dutch doctor and his wife, who late one night, they hear a rap on their door, and they open the door, and it's the Fey folk. They look the man in the eye, this Dutch doctor who signed an affidavit, mind you, after all this, saying this was real. They ask, we need your wife. We need a midwife. There's a pregnancy afoot. Someone's pregnant. Someone's having a baby. We need her. Hearing the legends about these folk from the locals, they know they should help them. So the wife goes. She gets whooshed away to another land. She helps this entity that's very human, give birth. The next day, the family receives an abundance of food and rewards. That's how the story goes. Signed affidavit from these Dutch folks. Very much in the Oz factor, right? The sensation of being isolated or transported from the real world to a different environmental framework. These stories are ancient. You look in the old holy text too. Anyone you look into will have a story like this about being transported to some other world where entities interact with you. That's what the Oz factor is. I love the Oz factor. It reminds me of the Goblin universe, which is the original idea of this from the 50s and 60s, of this other world, right? This other dimensional world. So the Oz factor, same thing. The sensation that thousands of people report after they have a paranormal experience. Same thing happened with this werewolf experience here in Wisconsin. So that is the werewolf of Shawano County, Wisconsin. And we're not done there. We got another werewolf. We have a late night encounter of the werewolf kind. A creature literally going bump in the night for Nick Redfern, author of many books, one of them being The Monster Diary. So let's dig into his encounter. It was 4 a.m. and I was awake and yet not awake. And I couldn't move. I was utterly frozen in bed. Suddenly, I became aware, however, of something awful, a terrible An infernal thing was slowly heading down the darkened corridor that linked my bedroom to the living room. That something, which I could see in some strange and unclear fashion, was a man-sized figure with the head of a wolf and dressed in a long black cape. It emitted a strange and rapid growl that seemed to be a language. Even though I couldn't understand it, the creature, whatever its origins, seemed mightily ticked off about something. As it closed in on the door, I made a supreme effort to move my rigid form and finally succeeded. Just as the man-beast entered the bedroom, in an instant it was gone, and I was wide awake. From Wisconsin to a late-night encounter in the bedroom, we go to more encounters. Another one in Wisconsin, this time in a trailer park. Our next werewolf tale comes from one of my favorites, North American Monsters. Now, North American Monsters is amazing because we have a stat box. And the stat box goes over what to expect when expecting a werewolf encounter. Now, the distinguishing features of werewolves: black fur, glowing red eyes, and huge teeth. Their height is about 5'7", weight 110 to 300 pounds. Range and habitat: any wilderness in North America, especially those on the edge of civilization. Population size: less than 500. Diet: carnivore. Behavior: werewolves. Men and women capable of assuming the form of a wolf typically gorge on humans whenever they transform, although a small percentage only hunt woodland creatures. Source: folklore and urban legends. Encountering a werewolf is rated 4 Jersey Devils out of 5. This means that if you are out in the woods late at night where werewolves roam, you will be eaten or turned into one. Be wary, thy traveler, on roads late at night. One of the most infamous sightings of a werewolf in America took place in Gregton, Texas in 1958. Mrs. Delbert Gregg, surely one of the prominent members of town in Gregton, horrified, spotted a large hulking wolf clawing at the screen of her bedroom window. The monster, which bared white fangs and had gleaming eyes, sprinted into the bushes when Mrs. Gregg retrieved a flashlight. However, in just a few moments, a large man emerged from the bushes at the exact spot where the beast had disappeared. The man calmly walked to the road and wandered away. In March 1967, a werewolf was killed by Marvin Meade, who shot the large animal near Gotham, Illinois. Local authorities paid Meade a bounty of $15 and confiscated the corpse. Common tale. What happened to the corpse? It disappeared, and what did the authorities say? There's no werewolves. The corpse has since disappeared. 3 years later, a similar monster was spotted alongside a road near Gallup, New Mexico. The werewolf chased a car exceeding speeds of 45 miles per hour, whereupon one of the passengers pulled out a gun and blasted the monster. The werewolf collapsed, but when the motorist returned to the scene of the monster's evident demise, not a trace of the creature nor any bloodstains were to be found. Then in February 1971, the small town of Lawton, Oklahoma, near Fort Sill, was plagued by a werewolf. A startled housewife first spied the beast standing upright on her back porch, and another witness subsequently suffered a heart attack after spying the creature. The most prominent sighting occurred when 2 soldiers confronted the monster near a local cemetery. The Lawton werewolf has never been caught, and authorities kept the case open well into the 1990s. You know, that's a great question, Big, on if they come back the same size and shape. We don't know. We'd have to see one, grow one back, I believe. Maybe it comes back stronger. Like sometimes our bones heal a little stronger, you know? So we have in Lawton, Oklahoma, sightings of a werewolf from 1971 to the 1990s. To me, this seems like a pattern. This seems like truth. Something's out there roaming around in Oklahoma. It's like on cycles. And these sightings go well into the 90s, and we just like don't talk about them, or like what, we don't trust anybody who's seen it. This next one is a classic from Mobile, Alabama. A female werewolf who had the upper torso of a nude woman and the lower extremities of a wolf terrorized Mobile, Alabama throughout the spring of 1971. Then fast forward to corroborate what we read in the other book. Then there's a Wisconsin werewolf more recently, where one or more of these monsters has been stalking people since 1988. The Wisconsin werewolf first emerged in Delavan on a dairy farm housing a large number of cows. Witnesses claimed that the monster had human hands but a wolf's head, and it alternated between traveling on 2 legs and 4. Since 1988, the creature has been investigated by numerous local authorities and featured on respectable tabloid news shows. It has only been spotted many times along Bray Road. And of course, we're talking about the infamous Beast of Bray Road, one of America's many dogmen, where it lurks at night and is implicated in the desecration of several graves in the local pet cemetery. And if you're a fan of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, they use those stories in the beginning of that movie. Because werewolves are wild spirits moved by a desire to be free and unchained, monsterologists should search for werewolves in the untamed wilderness. Any exceptionally large wolf, especially one with uncanny intelligence or glowing eyes, is likely to be a werewolf. Keep that in mind, monster hunters. Werewolves are not inherently evil or cannibalistic, and many researchers have spied werewolves with no ill effect. However, if you're attacked, a silver bullet through the monster's heart can usually bring it down. I'm sure any bullet through the heart, but it's not, it's not bad to do a little silver. Now, when the beast collapsed, you must remove the werewolf's head. I mean, I don't know. I think this is the author going off the tracks here. He's kind of speculating. Now, if you encounter a werewolf and you wound it, according to the monster guide here, fret not, for when it turns back into a human, it will be healed. Now, encountering these things are 4 Jersey Devils out of 5, let me remind you. So be wary. Anyone out there trying to have an encounter with the unknown in any sort of wood late at night, you might run into a shapeshifter yourself. And that is werewolves. From antiquity to modern times, folks have always had encounters with strange dog-like and wolf-like beasts. Whether it be a mass hallucination through time, a mass blip of consciousness, an imagination that connects us to our ancient selves, just as powerful as if it's actually a creature running around out there. And that is werewolves. The next creature I want to talk about tonight for things that go bump in the night is a Generation X classic, a cryptid born on the internet. The first cryptid websites on NeoCities, GeoCities, with the cool graphics, were created about this cryptid, and that is El Chupacabra, Generation X's #1 cryptid. Before we get into that, I'm feeling a little unsafe. I think I need my safety hat on, so it's time to put on a hat.
And here's your party hat. You'd like to come? You're sitting now. Your party
This is a damn fine cup of coffee.
For old El Chupacabra, we're going to continue to read from A Field Guide to North American Monsters. If you're looking for a compendium of fun monsters that people have encountered in the depths and backwoods of the American outback, this is the book for you. Next, we're going to read its section on Chupacabra. Now, I'll say it again, and I've said it a million times. My favorite thing about this book is the stat box, and I'm going to start there. El Chupacabra, or if you're rude, the goat sucker. Distinguishing features: bat-like wings, glowing red eyes, fangs, a terrible stench, and a generally horrible appearance. Now, why I like this book's description of the Chupacabra, I have many other books we could check out that talk about the Chupacabra. I mean, this one, and this one. But this one's the best because it has my favorite description of the creature, and that is the beast with wings and spikes on its back and glowing red eyes. That's the one I hope is out there. The height of this beast is 3 to 4 feet. The weight is 70 to 120 pounds. The range and habitat: northern Mexico, Texas, much of the Southwest, California, South America, and Puerto Rico. Population size: unknown. Diet: carnivore. Behavior: the flying vampire beast known as El Chupacabra silently patrols the skies, only descending from the darkness to attack livestock and people. Second reason why I like this book's description of the beast, because it mentions how it flies. This is something that's left out of a lot of modern Chupacabra reports. Oftentimes, when you read a report of the unknown, just know that a lot of the more fantastic elements might have been stripped out from the original story. The source of all this hoopla about the old Chupacabra comes from folklore, urban legend, and cryptozoology. So we have ancient cases of weird beasts mutilating cattle, followed up with urban legend in the more modern times, and cryptozoology being like cryptozoologists in the 90s and early aughts studying this beast. Now, encountering a Chupacabra, like the werewolf, this is rated 4 Jersey Devils out of 5. If you go to the areas where Chupacabras are known to exist and you go with the right heart, the right aura, the beast will reveal itself. Or if you decide to open a ranch out there, have goats, chickens, whatever the fuck, the beast will show up and maybe suck on some of your goats, take their guts out. Chickens too, who knows? But let's dive in to El Chupacabra. One of the most recently discovered monsters, El Chupacabra, or the goat sucker, is a savage beast known to hunt the skies from South America to Canada. Today, it is most often sighted in the southwestern United States, Puerto Rico, and Florida, although it has also appeared in eastern Texas and northern California as well. A typical Chupacabra is covered in glossy matted hair and has a feral face. Its long limbs, which end in a massive claws, can propel the monster across any terrain at amazing speeds. But it is the creature's powerful bat-like wings that allow it to migrate huge distances and carry victims off into the night. Goat suckers are deceptively small, standing just 3 or 4 feet high. But within this diminutive body lurks a strength that only a monster's hunger could produce. Capable of wrestling full-grown bulls to the ground, the Chupacabra proves far stronger than mere mortals. Once pinned, a victim's neck is neatly pierced by the Chupacabra's huge fangs, and the veins sucked dry in minutes. Prey can also be hypnotized by its luminescent red eyes, paralyzed by the creature's horrifying appearance, or overcome by the Chupacabra's terrible, stale urine stench. The beast has a seemingly unquenchable appetite. In Puerto Rico, where the monster first appeared in late 1995, at least 2,000 animals were killed by goat suckers in less than 8 months. The creature feeds on a wide variety of prey, including lambs, rabbits, sheep, turkeys, dogs, and of course, goats. In southern Florida, the Chupacabra are fond of chickens and ducks. In Fresno, California, they prefer puppies, pet cats, and pet roosters. Oh, swear to God. I would hunt every Chupacabra down on the fucking mountain if they targeted my babies. Chupacabras also attack larger animals, including horses, cattle, and bulls. Chupacabras have no qualms about attacking humans. In Sao Paulo and Rio, it is believed that the Chupacabras steal children from the slums, drain their victims of blood, and leave the lifeless bodies in dirty alleys. I don't think that's Chupacabras doing that. I think it's someone else. Chupacabras have hunted children in the schoolyards of Mexico City as well. Terrifying and savage attacks on adults have taken place in as many as 5 different Mexican states. And in late May of 1996, a young nurse near Mexico City reportedly had her arm severed by a Chupacabra. That same year, in the western state of Jalisco, a farm worker displayed prominent fang marks on his body after claiming that he was ambushed by a Chupacabra. Dade County, Florida suffered a rash of assaults during the summer of early fall of 1996, and the Chupacabra attacks continue to be reported throughout Texas and the Southwest. To stop these creatures before more attacks occur, at least a few people within the Chupacabra's known hunting grounds have attempted to capture and kill the beast. All such endeavors have failed. And this goes with all such endeavors as Bigfoot, right? We have the infamous case of someone setting up a Bigfoot trap. They literally made some woman wait in the trap thinking that that's what it would attract Bigfoot. Nothing happened. These creatures, allegedly, if they're out there and not just some mass, vivid hallucination of the human mind, they have abilities beyond our consciousness. Or they're able to pop in or out. Or they're just something so weird that it makes us freeze and think wild things, and then they disappear. Because they're more connected to nature than we are. So when they feel the danger from us noticing them, they... Or Chupacabras also sound a lot like if you want to really go down the rabbit hole, Chupacabras sound a lot like a programmed life form, a chimera, if you will, a beast composed of many different beasts, something created in a lab and unleashed. If you're to walk with someone like Emery Smith, who allegedly was a biochemist, a biologist working for the government and dissected many alien creatures, you might walk with the idea that a Chupacabra could be a PLF, a programmed life form, something created in a lab. Or maybe something interdimensional, like a Sasquatch or a gray alien. But anywho, monsterologists interested in glimpsing the Chupacabra should hide near a farm at night in the area where Chupacabra's attacks have been recently reported. As the winged monstrosity drops from the sky, monsterologists equipped with night vision goggles will be presented with a unique view of these creatures. However, the Chupacabra's sense of smell is keen, and there is always the danger that it will detect a human presence. If the Chupacabra attacks, flee at once, for the monster cannot be reliably countered by any conventional means. If you are bitten by the Chupacabra but manage to survive the encounter, visit a hospital immediately. There is a strong possibility that the Chupacabra carries various diseases and viruses, including the rabies. And that is El Chupacabra. Something not mentioned in here that's mentioned in other books, namely this bad boy Unexplained, is you'll find, like on the Internet Archive, if you search, there were many websites created about the Chupacabra in the 90s. The Chupacabra was the darling of Generation X and the Internet generation. The very first old web Internet generation created websites for El Chupacabra before they created websites for Bigfoot. Something to note in the history of the old goat sucker. So that is El Chupacabra. Came to be in prominence in the 90s, mainly in Puerto Rico, but also in the States and throughout Mexico. Sightings continue to this day, whether it's a chimera of a programmed life form or some unknown predator that we haven't discovered yet. Who knows? But there is something breaking into people's chicken coops and sucking them dry. We go to a lesser known creature that was sighted in the 30s and then later in the 40s, and that is the Mad Gasser. Now, the Mad Gasser is an entity that was sneaking around the suburbs in the 40s and 50s, pumping gas into people's homes. Now let's read about its first sightings. The Mad Gasser of Mattoon. Now let me tell you one thing. This didn't just happen in Mattoon. About 10 years before this, there was a sighting of the same type of creature in Boughton Court, Virginia in the 1930s. What we're going to read about now happened in the 1940s in Illinois. When you look into the literature about the Mad Gasser, what you're going to find is largely it was contributed to mass hysteria. We're going to learn in this little section and the part of Unexplained that is bunk. Let's begin. Now we're reading from the North American Guide here, so we're going to get a little stat box, my favorite. Distinguishing features of the Mad Gasser: gaunt face, black costume, and a futuristic helmet. Height about 6 feet. Weight approximately 190 pounds. Range and habitat: Mattoon, Illinois, and other areas across the continent. Population size: 1 of 1. An OG. Diet: unknown. Behavior: one of the most enigmatic of all monsters, the Mad Gasser enjoys exposing unwitting humans to sickly sweet gas which can cause extreme nausea and temporary paralysis. The source of this is urban legend and Fortean Studies. Fortean Studies is the studies of the unknown, studies of the paranormal. Encountering the beast is only rated 2 Jersey Devils out of 5. Very low rating here. The Mad Gasser is known to only really have been seen in the 30s and 40s. There's been other reports of strange gas being leaked into places, but those have legitimately been attributed to mass hysteria. Let's get into the Gasser sightings, though. Few mysteries investigated by monsterologists are as puzzling as the case of the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. A mysterious figure that delights in sending toxic fumes into unsuspecting homes during the hours after midnight. The Gasser first achieved widespread recognition among monsterologists on August 31st, 1944, when several residents of sleepy Mattoon, Illinois, awoke feeling violently ill. In the 2 weeks that followed, almost 30 people exhibited symptoms of exposure, including severe bouts of vomiting, extreme weakness, and partial paralysis. Fainting and respiratory difficulties were also commonly experienced. Those exposed to concentrated amounts of the gas, which moves in blue fingers and has a sickening sweet odor, suffered the most severe symptoms. 11-year-old Glinda Hendershot was found unconscious in her bedroom after she was subjected to a toxic cloud on September 6, 1944. The day before, Baldua Cordes and her husband discovered a wet white cloth on their front porch, and when Balula inhaled the fumes from the drenched rag, she was afflicted by instant paralysis below the knees, uncontrollable vomiting, and excessive swelling on the lips and face. There we have it, folks. Never sniff a wet handkerchief you find in your yard. Miss Cordes suffered from these symptoms for over 2 hours. During the 1944 attacks, the most harmful effects of the gas were short-lived, lasting anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes. However, long-term effects, including a parched mouth and throat, burned lips, and hacking cough, lasted for weeks in many instances. After the first round of illnesses, local authorities made several attempts to discover the source of the toxic fumes. Homes were inspected for gas leaks, but none could be found. The investigators had few leads and even fewer theories regarding the sudden sickness sweeping Mattoon, until several nights after the onset of the epidemic, when witnesses spotted a strangely garbed individual creeping near windows of the afflicted. Based on information gathered from first-hand descriptions, the Phantom, the Mad Gasser, is a tall, haggard humanoid. He prefers to wear a skin-tight dark suit and a large gas mask, though he has also been known to sport a silver suit and metallic helmet as well. After the Mad Gasser was informally identified as an adult human male, Mattoon police searched the area for derelicts or escaped mental patients. Eventually, they happened upon a small shack that may have functioned as the Gasser's hideout. A single arrest was made, but the suspect passed a lie detector test and was released. Detectives did manage to collect a few pieces of physical evidence from the crime scenes, including a gas-soaked rag found on the Cordes porch. At the Cordes residence, the police also stumbled across an empty lipstick tube and a skeleton key. Neither item, however, established the Gasser's identity. Meanwhile, the Mad Gasser attacks continued and public outrage mounted. Armed mobs tried in vain to hunt down the culprit. The FBI made quiet inquiries and conducted a short investigation, but the agents were also foiled by the Mad Gasser, and their top scientists could not identify the gas that was used. By mid-September, the Gasser was prying loose windows, cutting holes in screens, and pushing on doors in an attempt to enter the homes of victims. In every case, he was easily frightened away by screaming residents, but the escalating nature of the assaults drove the public to a heightened state of terror. Exasperated and desperate local authorities tried to mollify the public and the press by offering improbable theories. The first of these was the gas was actually a carbon tetrachloride inadvertently released in the winds by a nearby Atlas Imperial diesel engine company. This theory fell flat when it was discovered that the tetrachloride was present at the Atlas plant only in the fire extinguishers. The Gasser attacks eventually ceased, and the Phantom left Mattoon as quietly as he had arrived. When it was clear the attacks had stopped, the panic subsided. Frustrated authorities attributed the rash of sicknesses to hoaxers and mass hysteria. The mainstream press accepted this theory, and the Mad Gasser almost became a footnote in the annals of monsterology. But fortunately, apt monsterologists kept the research going, and they found out that in 1933, in Beautoncourt, Virginia, people had the very same encounter with a strangely garbed entity, much like Damian Priest, as Biggs said, in full black, tight uniform, was leaking gas into people's homes. The same sort of blue finger tendrils of gas that would seep into a house, paralyze people, make them vomit, turn them sick. They saw a figure with this as well. 1933, Beautoncourt, Virginia. 1944-ish, in Mattoon, Illinois. The Gasser strikes again. Now, later on, we have gas attacks that don't have the background of a entity being associated with it, and they do seem more like mass hysteria, like the one that talks about in the Field Guide to North American Monsters here. They mention in the 60s there's an office building that suffers this attack, a creature that's bumping in the night, pumping gas in. No one sees a creature, but people in the office experience all these illnesses. However, the only people experiencing the illnesses are people who speak English. no one who has English as their second language in the building experiences any of the sicknesses. So that leads credence to mass hysteria, people spreading the story, kind of like the placebo effect, people feeling sick. But that doesn't apply to the Mad Gasser case. Mad Gasser case, we have something happening in 33 and then something happening in 44 in two places that are far apart from each other. And people didn't, there were reports, separate reports of this Mad Gasser before it could have been mass hysteria, before it was in newspapers. That's why I think there's something to it. So I'm like 99% on the Mad Gasser. And that is another creature bumping in the night, the Mad Gasser. The next creature or creatures we're going to learn about that also like to bump in the night, be a little mischievous. Goblins. Goblins that descended on a poor family outside of Hopkinsville, Kentucky, right near Kelly, Kentucky. Goblins that attacked them all night until the morning light. And that is the case of the Hopkinsville Goblins, a case that's been studied by the Air Force, by independent scientists, by law enforcement, a case that is yet to be solved. And this is our second to last creature to go bump in the night, the Hopkinsville Goblins. So sit back, relax, and let's learn about a group of creatures that went bump in the night on a whole ass family. We're going back to 1955 and meeting a man named Billy Ray Taylor. Let me just give you a taste of what this man experienced. Ouch. Scary. Bootified. Get me back inside. Early on the evening of August 21st, 1955, Billy Ray Taylor, who lived with 10 other persons, all but 2 of them relatives, in a farmhouse near Kelly, Kentucky, stepped outside to get drinking water in a backyard well. He dashed into the house to announce that he had seen a flying saucer drop down into a gully on the far side of the surrounding field. Now, as we read this story, I want you to please remember a recent encounter that happened to a family in the past couple years, the Vegas encounter. Lights in the sky were documented not only by witnesses, but on a police officer's fucking body cam. Not an hour or two later, this family that lives outside Las Vegas has an encounter with an 8-foot strange being that they capture on film after lights land in their backyard. These stories continue to happen. We are on cycles. This is the one that happened in the 50s with goblins. They continue to happen today with things like the Vegas encounter. However, like most times when you report seeing lights land in a field, no one takes you seriously. And no one took Billy Ray here seriously enough to investigate. But about an hour later, when they heard the dog's frightened barks and saw it shoot under the house with its tail between its legs, Taylor and Lucky Sutton looked out back at the strangest thing they had ever seen. A luminous, 3.5-foot tall being with an oversized head, big floppy pointed ears, glowing eyes, and hands with talons at the end. The figure, either made of or simply dressed in a silvery metal, had its hands raised. If this was intended as a gesture of peace, it was not so interpreted. Hands raised, right? Not very threatening. But what did Billy Ray and Lucky do? When it got within 20 feet, the 2 men, they opened up on it with a shotgun and a .22 rifle. In response, it flipped over and scurried into the darkness along the side of the house. A few minutes later, the same or a similar being showed its face in the side window. And this time, J.C. Sutton, Lucky's brother, and Taylor fired on it. In J.C.'s case, almost at point-blank range. I imagine doing more damage to the house than the creature. Until about 11 p.m., when all concerned packed into a car and roared at top speed to the Hopkinsville police station 7 miles away, the witnesses repeatedly saw and shot at the creatures, which would roll over and escape, propelling themselves with their arms and hands. Their legs, skinny and inflexible, seemed to have no other function than to orient them vertically. If the creatures were in a tree or on the roof when they hit, they would float, not fall to the ground. At no time did they display overt hostility. The observers had no idea how many of the creatures there were. They could only be certain that there were at least 2 because once they saw that number at the same time. When they showed up at the station, the witnesses were in a state of such hysteria that the police chief, Russell Greenwell, said it was evident that something beyond reason, not ordinary, had frightened them. On the way back to the farm, a medically trained investigator measured the pulse rate of Taylor's neck. It was twice the normal. But there was additional evidence. A state police officer's sighting made at the time of the witness's flight to Hopkinsville of strange meteors passing overhead with a noise like artillery fire. They were heading the opposite direction of the witnesses. In other words, north in the direction of Kelly. So just like the Vegas encounter, we have a police officer who actually saw lights in the sky before the family had the encounter in Kelly. Though they found no direct evidence of alien visitors, Greenwell and other investigating officers found plenty of indications that shooting had been taking place. Aside from that, Greenwell told ufologist Isabel Davis, in and around the whole area, the house, the fields, that night, there was a weird feeling. It was partly uneasiness, but not entirely. Everyone had it. There were men there that I'd call brave men. They felt it too. They also saw an odd luminous patch alongside a fence where one of the beings had been shot, and in the woods beyond, a green light whose source could not be determined. Later on, returning to the house, members of the household spotted the being several more times. And on one occasion, Lucky Sutton shot one through a window, doing more damage to the latter than the former. The final sighting occurred at 4:45 a.m. Investigations by police, reporters, Air Force officers, and civilian ufologists uncovered no evidence of a hoax. Even Blue Book, which usually had an explanation to suit, if not always comfortably, every occasion, confessed to being stumped. So was Davis, among the most hard-headed of UFO investigators. Inevitably, some skeptics charged that witnesses were drunk, which Chief Greenwald testified they were not, or speculated that they had seen escaped monkeys. Of this proposed solution, Davis wrote, "No amount of optical illusion can explain a mistake of this magnitude." And that is the Hopkinsville Goblins. More parallels to the Vegas case. In the Vegas case, the family had this encounter and they told the news, and they originally were like open about saying shit, but then looky-loos and ruiners show up at their house and bother them, and the family goes silent and doesn't want to talk about it anymore. This trope is consistent throughout ufology history. There's a man who receives space crackers from space aliens, and because so many people show up at his house, he just disappears and doesn't tell his story anymore. That happened with the Vegas case. Like I said, they stopped talking to the press. Same thing happens with this Kelly, Kentucky, Hopkinsville Goblin case. People start showing up at the family's ranch, start wanting to talk to them. They disappear. They don't tell their story anymore. So all we have is this, the newspaper articles, the report from the chief. The family went away because we were too fucking curious. We were too bothersome. We were too probably accusatory and laughatory. So they bailed. Can't blame them. However, the mystery of the Hopkinsville Goblins remains. One of the ultimate stories of creatures going bump in the night. Still unexplained to this day. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, Dr. Jacques Vallée all look into it, can find no explanation. This family was most likely visited by creatures of other consciousness or from another dimension that showed up peacefully, were shot at, and kept trying to communicate, even though the family kept shooting. I don't know. That's just how I feel. But that's the Hopkinsville Goblins, one of the most infamous cases of creatures going bump in the night. Little creatures, lights in the sky, creatures running by. Next up, And our last story of the night for our Monsters After Midnight, episode 1, is the attack at Ape Canyon. One of the first recorded instances in the West of a Bigfoot aggression against some gold miners. Now, gold, if you're in the know, like watching the things I like to watch, you know, might be a valuable resource to entities of unknown origins. So let's read about these gold miners and their encounter with the ape men. And this happened before Sasquatch was a big dog. This happened before Sasquatch was on the scene, before Sasquatch was called Sasquatch or Bigfoot. In the early years of the 20th century, the words Bigfoot and Sasquatch were not so instantly recognizable as they are today. Though rural residents of the Pacific Northwest knew that some people believed a race of hairy giants with both ape and human features lived in the woods and mountains, according to nearly all reports then and since. These creatures are of a retiring disposition and, upon encountering a human being, opt to duck out of sight as rapidly as possible. In other words, for all their size and fierce appearance, they practically never behave aggressively, and that's why this attack is significant. However, if you've been with me on my other show, the Book Club, which I host in the morning, the Sunrise Book Club, and sometimes at night, the Midnight Book Club, you'd know that there's a reason for this. There actually exists a difference between three-toed hairy humanoids and the ones that have 5 toes. The classic Sasquatch or Yeti have footprints more like ours. They're just fucking giant. There are also entities that have been reported to have 3-toed footprints. These entities are much more aggressive. The stories are much wilder. These are stories like Momo, a version of the skunk ape, and I believe of Grassman. All creatures who are reported to have 3 toes. All creatures reported to have banged on doors, attacked with rocks, and all that other good stuff. So we're about to meet something of that variety. However, if we are to believe Fred Beck, an exception to that pattern of behavior manifested itself one night in July 1924. The episode was reported in local newspapers at the time, and reporters who came to the site noted the presence of big footprints, and Beck swore to its truth to the end of his life decades later. In 1967, he and his son published a short book based on the elder Beck's memories of the encounter. Beck and his 4 partners eked out a living prospecting for gold in the Mount St. Helens and Lewis River region of southwestern Washington. From time to time, they found giant human-like footprints in the sand along the water. They also would hear a peculiar thudding or hollow thumping noise, but could never determine its source. There were also shrill whistling sounds. By now, the men would not go anywhere without their rifles. Finally, as Beck and a companion, identified only as Hank, were drawing water from a spring not far from their mountain cabin, they saw and shot a 7-foot-tall ape-like creature. It sprinted away, disappearing from sight for a short while, then reappeared 200 yards down the canyon. Beck fired at it 3 times before it was lost to sight. So here's the lesson, folks. Don't fire at unknown monsters, especially after midnight. All that night, with only brief interludes of quiet, quote-unquote apes besieged the cabin. They threw rocks at it, jumped on the roof, tried to smash the door open, even as Beck and Hank riddled it with bullets. At daybreak, the attack ended, and as the sun rose, the men gingerly stepped outside. A few minutes later, spotting one of the apes standing near the edge of the canyon 80 yards away, Beck put his rifle to his shoulder, aimed, and fired, and watched the creature drop 400 feet into the gorge below. Oh no, don't do that. That's the opposite of what you need to do, Beck. The area where these events supposedly took place is still known as Ape Canyon. Over the years, several individuals have come forward to testify that Beck and his companions were victims of a prank for which they were responsible. These stories do not agree with each other, however, nor are they compatible with Beck's. For the hoax claims to work, we must assume that the victims helped the pranksters along by falling victim to an extraordinary vivid hallucinations. It also seems odd when one considers the prominent role of gunfire and the role that gunfire plays in the tale. That the pranksters persisted despite the clear and present danger to their very lives. Yeah, I mean, they shot so many bullets. It's not just pranksters. Those people are just... I feel like those people are looking for more attention than the people who actually encountered the entity. I don't know, though. In short, it's easier to believe that Beck was the perpetrator of a hoax than that he was a victim of one. His son Ronald Beck still swears that his father's story was straight and true. And Peter Byrne, an incredulous Bigfoot investigator who interviewed Beck in 1960, wrote that he seemed to me to be honest and to be telling a true account, much like all the UFO accounts we've read about in Dimensions on Wednesday and Thursday's book club. It's like just salt of the earth people telling these stories. There's no reason for them to lie. They don't get any fucking fame from this. They just get ridiculed. The other alleged witnesses were long scattered and not locatable, even if alive, by the time there was such a thing as a Bigfoot investigator. So except for the early newspaper accounts, we have nothing from their point of view, and at this juncture are unlikely to have it. And that is the attack of Ape Canyon. The most interesting thing about this is Beck, if you're to pick up his pamphlet, if you could find a copy of it, I'm still looking for one. He reports these entities to be of paranormal origin. He tells his son, God damn it, if there's one thing I know, dollars to donuts, these things are not of terrestrial origin. They are paranormal. They seem to pop in and out of existence. So that is the Ape Canyon attack. And those are your creatures that go bump in the night. Tonight, we looked at modern werewolf sightings, the origins of Generation X's favorite cryptid, El Chupacabra, Mothman, the Mad Gasser, a Goblin attack, and a Sasquatch attack. Thank you for joining me on the inaugural episode of Monsters After Midnight. We will be back next Saturday with a whole new subject, a whole new lineup of monsters. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed learning that werewolves, El Chupacabra, Mothman, Mad Gassers, goblins, and ape-like humanoids walk among us. And if you're sassy to them, they'll be sassy right on back. Thanks for joining me for Monsters After Midnight. Hope you have sweet dreams and may you have a beautiful paranormal encounter. Good night.